The Oklahoma Panhandle in the 1930s was no place for dreamers. Dust storms rolled in like biblical plagues, blotting out the sun and choking the life from the land. Robert Samuel Johnson, born February 21, 1920, in the dusty crossroads of Lawton, knew that world intimately. His father, a rough-hewn oilfield roughneck, chased rigs from one failing lease to the next, Bartlesville to Ponca City, Wichita Falls and back, dragging a family of 6 through the Great Depression's vice grip. Meals were beans and cornbread when luck held, empty promises when it didn't. Young Bob learned early that survival wasn't a gift. It was a grind, etched into the calluses of your hands and the steel in your spine. He was 9 when the first big blow hit, a wall of black dirt that buried the family Ford under a foot of grit. Bob shoveled it out alone, coughing blood-flecked phlegm, while his father cursed the indifferent sky. "We don't break," his old man would mutter, wiping sweat from a brow lined like cracked earth. "We bend till the wind quits." That mantra stuck. School was sporadic. Arithmetic in the mornings, odd jobs hauling scrap in the afternoons. But in the rare quiet hours, Bob found solace in the pages of Flying Aces magazine, dog-eared and passed hand-to-hand among the boys. Spitfire sketches, biplane duels over no man's land. He built models from balsa scraps and rubber bands, launching them into the wind until they splintered on fence posts. At 15, he sweet-talked a barnstormer at the county fair into a ride in a battered Jenny. The engine's roar vibrated through his bones like thunder. Up there, the dust didn't matter. The hunger faded. For the first time, Bob Johnson felt unbreakable. By 1941, with Pearl Harbor's smoke still curling over the Pacific, that fire drew him to the Army Air Corps. Flight training at Randolph Field was a crucible. Stalls that clawed at your gut, spins that mocked your reflexes. Bob washed out twice, once on a botched loop, once on a crosswind landing that crumpled a wingtip. Instructors called him stubborn, a hothead with Dust Bowl pride. But he adapted. He studied harder, flew cleaner. Bend, don't break, he reminded himself in the cockpit's sweat-soaked confines. Graduating in March 1942, Second Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson pinned on his wings with hands that still smelled of Oklahoma red clay. Assigned to the 61st Fighter Squadron, 56th Fighter Group, Zemke's Wolfpack, he shipped out to England that summer. The war in the skies over Europe was no magazine fantasy. It was attrition, raw and unforgiving. American boys in green-painted Mustangs and Lightnings were learning, but the hard way. Colonel Hubert Zemke ran the 56th like a wolfpack indeed, lean, feral, always hunting the edge. A barrel-chested tactician from Missoula, Montana, Zemke had eyes like chipped flint and a voice that cut through briefing room smoke. He'd flown P-40s in the Philippines, dodged Zeros over Java. Now he molded green pilots into predators. "We're not here to die pretty," he'd growl, pacing the Neeson hut at Halesworth Airfield. "We're here to make the Luftwaffe bleed. Energy is your god, height, speed, the turn you force on them. Strike hard, vanish like smoke." The group was a brotherhood forged in frost-bitten dawns and debriefing scotch. Jerry Peterson, the quiet Sharp 47 from Iowa, Walker Bud Mahurin, the Indiana farm boy with a gambler's grin, and Bob Johnson, the Oklahoman who attacked only when the odds bent his way. They flew the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, a beast of a machine that embodied Zemke's philosophy. Brute force over finesse, survival woven into every rivet. The P-47 wasn't elegant. It was a flying tank, 4,000 pounds of armored fury powered by a 2,000 horsepower Pratt & Whitney double wasp radial engine that guzzled fuel like a thirst-mad steer. Designers at Farmingdale, Long Island, had built it for the European meat grinder. Self-sealing fuel tanks that laughed at bullets, a cockpit armored like a vault, and a wing so thick it could shrug off flak bursts that would shred a Spitfire. Critics called it a slug. Top speed barely scraping 430 miles per hour, a turning radius wide as the Mississippi. But pilots like Johnson knew better. In a dive, the Jug, as they nicknamed it, hit 500 miles per hour, its .850 caliber Brownings spitting 1,800 rounds a minute. It climbed like a homesick angel on water injection, and when hit, it absorbed punishment that would doom lesser birds. "The Thunderbolt doesn't fly," Zemke liked to say, slapping the fuselage of Half-Pint, his personal mount. "It endures." Johnson took to it immediately. Strapped into the razorback cockpit of his own ship, Section 8, he felt the jug's mass as an extension of his own grit. Unyielding, born of hard times. June 26, 1943 dawned gray over East Anglia, the kind of damp chill that seeped into your flight suit and settled in your lungs. The 56th's mission was straightforward on paper. Rendezvous with the 4th Wing's B-17s over the Channel, escort the heavies to Villacoublay airfield south of Paris. Intelligence pegged it as a Luftwaffe hive, FD-190s and Bf-109s nesting like hornets, ripe for the picking. But Zemke's briefings were never sugar-coated. "Expect company," he rumbled, chalking vectors on the blackboard. "The Huns own that sky. Stay tight, watch your six, and remember, one stray fortress is a dinner bell." Johnson nodded from the back row, his flight suit zipped tight against the hut's draft. At 23, he had 3 kills to his name, 2 109s over Lille, a W over Abbeville, but survivability was his creed. Attack with advantage, he told his wingman, young Steve Adams, over pre-flight coffee. Or don't attack at all. Takeoff was a symphony of thunder. 48 P-47s lumbered down Halesworth's pierced steel planking, props chewing fog into mist. Johnson's jug wallowed at first, the massive radial coughing blue smoke, then bit air with a roar that rattled hangar windows. He firewalled the throttle, the altimeter spinning like a roulette wheel, 1,000 feet, 5,000, 15,000. The formation coalesced over the wash, a jagged V of silver bellies glinting against the overcast. Radio crackle filled his ear. "Eagle flights, this is lead. Rendezvous in 5, Angels 25. The B-17s appeared on the horizon like iron geese, their contrails feathering white against the blue. Johnson slotted in at 500 yards off the bomber's right flank, his squadron mates fanned out like cards in a deck. The fortress gunners waved from waist windows, good luck talismans in a world of lead. The crossing was tense, the channel below a slate-gray expanse dotted with white caps. Johnson scanned the sky in quadrants, eyes straining against the haze. Empty blue, he thought, but instinct prickled. At 20,000 feet, the air was thin, the cockpit heater barely cutting the bite. His gloved hands flexed on the stick, the jug's controls heavy but sure. They hit the French coast near Le Havre at 10:15 hours, flak blooming black in the distance like ink in water. The B-17s droned on, superchargers whining, bomb bays heavy with 500-pounders for the runways at Villacoublay. Johnson's radio spat warnings, bandits 12 o'clock high. But it was a feint, 109s jinking in and out, testing resolve. The jugs climbed, engines bellowing, but the Germans faded east, vanishing into clouds. Then it happened. Over the Seine, a mile behind the formation, a B-17 from the 303rd, the Hells Angels, faltered. An engine cowling fluttered loose, trailing oil smoke like a distress flag. Piccadilly Lilies hit, the bomber's tail gunner barked over the command net. "Can't keep up," Johnson saw it. The fortress wallowing, her gunners blazing at shadows, exposed, alone, a magnet for every Jagdflieger in the sector. Zemke's voice cut in, calm as gravel. "Johnson, take your flight. Cover that bird. The rest, press on." Bob's pulse quickened. Advantage? Hell with it. This was duty, bone deep. "Section 8, this is lead," he keyed the mic, voice steady. "On me. Dive port. Give 'em hell." He peeled off, the jug's nose dropping like a hammer. Wind buffeted the canopy, the altimeter unwinding. 18,000, 15,000. Below, the B-17 limped eastward, her port wings scarred black from earlier flak. Johnson's squadron followed, throttles to the stops, 50s armed with a metallic clunk. The fortress's radio man waved frantic thanks as they closed. "Thanks, fighter boys. We owe you beers in London." But the sky felt wrong, heavy, watchful. Johnson's eyes flicked starboard, a habit drilled by 100 patrols. There at 3 o'clock low, a shadow detached from a cumulus wisp. Focke-Wulf 190, its radial engine a black dot against the green below. Slatted wings, lethal lines. The Predator had slipped the net. "Bandit on our 6!" Adams yelled too late. Johnson hauled back on the stick, the jug groaning in protest as he clawed for altitude. The B-17's gunners swiveled, tracers lacing the air. But the FW was closing, 400 yards and shrinking fast, precise, unhurried. Johnson glimpsed the pilot through the canopy, a ghost in goggles, scarred ship painted with victory bars. No wild cowboy, this was a surgeon with a scalpel. The Germans' cannons winked, 20mm shells, not the chattering 50s of American guns. time stretched. Then the sky shattered, and death began its work. The first shells arrived without warning, a staccato whip crack that punched through the P-47's belly like God's own judgment. Robert Johnson felt the jug buck beneath him, a seismic shudder rippling from the fuselage to the wing roots. The altimeter froze at 12,000 feet, its needle twitching like a dying insect. What the hell? His mind snapped to the 6 o'clock, but it was already too late. The Focke-Wulf 190 was there, a black shark in the peripheral blur, its BMW 801 radials snarling with predatory hunger. Four 20mm MG-151 cannons and two 13mm machine guns spat fire in a disciplined burst. Precisely 200 rounds, later tallied by engineers from the riddled wreckage. Not a wild spray, but a surgeon's incision, aimed to cripple, not kill outright. The German pilot, Oberleutnant Erich Buchholz of JG-26, known among his peers as Der Falke, the Falcon for his unerring strikes, didn't whoop or loop in triumph. He respected the game too much. This American had peeled off to shield a wounded bomber. Chivalry, even in war, demanded a clean finish. The impacts were visceral, a chain of hammer blows that tore Section 8 open from tail to cockpit. A 20mm shell detonated against the armored glass behind Johnson's head, showering him with shards that sliced his neck and scalp like razor confetti. Blood welled hot and immediate, trickling down his collar in salty rivulets. Another round shredded the radio rack, wires erupting in blue sparks that danced across the instrument panel like St. Elmo's fire. Static hissed once. "Johnson, brake left." From Adams, then silence, absolute and accusatory. The canopy spiderwebbed, wind howling through the cracks with a banshee wail that drowned the double wasp's bellow. Johnson yanked the stick hard over, the jug wallowing into a desperate barrel roll, but hydraulics were leaking fast. Amber fluid sprang in arcs that painted the windscreen opaque, controls mushy, too slow. He glimpsed the FW in the fractured mirror, closing again, 200 yards, patient as a hangman. Down below, the B-17's crew watched in impotent fury. Fighters hit bad, the tail gunner barked into his intercom, his 50 cal chattering futilely at the streaking Focke-Wulf. The Fortress's pilot, Captain Harlan Ramsey, gripped the yoke till his knuckles blanched. "Stay with him, boys, that's our Wolf." But the 56 other flights were committed forward, Zemke's orders ironclad, protect the formation. Johnson's squadrons scattered in the melee, Adams diving to draw fire, Peterson looping high for a deflection shot, but the FW danced through them like smoke, its slats deployed for a knife-edge pass that beggared the jug's lumbering bulk. Buchholz's voice, if Johnson could have heard it over the command net's ghosts, might have carried a note of admiration. A mutiger Amerikaner, he'd later confide in his logbook, a brave American. But war wasn't a gentleman's club. The kill was the kill. The second pass came at 300 miles per hour, the FW's nose blooming orange as it hosed the Thunderbolt's midsection. Shells raked the starboard wing, punching fist-sized craters through the skin, severing aileron cables in a spray of aluminum confetti. The jug slewed right, controls fighting Johnson like a bronco with a burr under its saddle. He kicked rudder, felt the pedals go spongy, hydraulic lines ruptured, and hauled back on the stick with arms corded like rebar. "Come on, you bastard. Turn for me." The engine surged, water methanol injection kicking in with a throaty growl, but fuel lines were weeping avgas now, the cockpit reeking of raw petrol and cordite. A machine gun round clipped the supercharger intake, sending shrapnel whispering through the cowling to pepper Johnson's left thigh. Pain bloomed, white-hot and distant, like biting into foil. He glanced down, khaki trousers darkening with crimson, the wound a ragged furrow from hip to knee. Not now. Focus. Blood smeared the throttle quadrant, sticky under his glove, as he firewalled it anyway, pushing the wounded radial to its limits, props blurring into a silver disc. The Focke-Wulf broke left, climbing for another angle, its silhouette etched against the patchwork fields of Normandy. Buchholz circled once, assessing elegant economy in a machine designed for the hunt. The 190 was Luftwaffe poetry. Radial power matched to a wing that bit air like teeth. 4 cannons that turned fighters to scrap in seconds. He'd claimed 11 kills since Crete. This would be 12. But something in the American's defiance gave him pause. A flat spin recovery Johnson executed with raw muscle, the jug clawing back to level flight on a wing and a prayer. Der Falke tipped his wings slightly, a ghost of salute, then dove again. Respect didn't mean mercy. Impact 3, a symphony of ruin. The 20mm struck true this time, one shell detonating square in the cockpit floor, blasting upward through the seat. Armor plate saved Johnson's spine, deflected the blast in a gout of fire that singed his flight boots, but the overpressure hammered his eardrums like twin mallets, leaving a high whine in their wake. Oxygen bottle ruptured with a pneumatic hiss, pure cryoblast scouring his face raw, frost rhyming his goggles in an instant. He tore them off, vision blurring through blood and ice, left eye swelling shut from a glass fragment lodged in the brow. Can't see. Can't breathe. The blast wave shredded the instrument panel, altimeter gone, airspeed jittering wildly between 200 and stall, compass spinning like a dervish. Gauges wept fluid, oil pressure zeroing, coolant temp redlining. The canopy blew out entirely now, wind at 400 miles per hour slamming into him like a freight train, tearing at his oxygen mask, flaying exposed skin on cheeks and hands. He tasted copper, blood from bitten tongue, and salt, tears freezing mid-track. Johnson's world narrowed to survival calculus, egress west, channels 80 miles, but the FU was looping back, a relentless shadow. He jinked south, feathering power to nurse the engine, but the jug protested with vibrations that rattled teeth. Ailerons flapped loose, hydraulics fully dead, brakes, flaps, gear all ghosts now. He flew by wire and instinct, trim tabs jury-rigged with elbow grease. The thigh wound throbbed, blood pooling in his boot, each heartbeat a squelch against the rudder pedal. 40 minutes of this. Maybe less. Cold clawed in, 20 degrees at altitude, amplified by the gale, numbing fingers till they felt like clubs. He couldn't feel the sticks bite anymore, just pressure, vague and alien. Bend, don't break. Father's words, dust choked and eternal. Below the Seine glittered like a silver vein, French villages smudged by flak haze. The B-17 had limped ahead, her crew whispering prayers for the fighter that bought her time. Adam's voice echoed in Johnson's mind. Faint radio phantom. Bob, punch out, bail. But the jug was his. It had taken the hits meant for him. Self-sealing tanks holding barely, the massive radial pockmarked but pounding. Republic's designers had bet on beasts like this. Overbuilt, overpowered, a middle finger to physics. Johnson coaxed a shallow turn west, sun dipping toward his left shoulder as a makeshift compass. The FW closed once more, cannons winking, tracers arcing like fireflies in hell. Rounds stitched the tail boom, shearing the horizontal stabilizer half off. The jug porpoised, nose dipping in a lazy stall. Johnson kicked full rudder, muscled the nose up with raw back strain. Not today. The German overshot, pulling a high G brake that left vapor cones in his wake. Buchholz banked east, fuel concerns trumping the chase, his own tanks low after the sprint from Villa Coublé. He waggled wings once more, a final nod to the undying foe, then vanished into the eastern murk. The duel was done. The real enemy remained. Alone now, Johnson assessed the carnage. Cockpit a charnel house, wires dangling like entrails, shattered glass crunching under his boots. Blood dripped steady onto the mangled panel, pattering like rain on tin. Oxygen gone, he gulped thin air at 10,000 feet, lungs burning, vision tunneling from blood loss. The engine coughed, a misfire from fouled plugs, but caught, a ragged snarl that was music. Wind screamed through the breaches, a constant blade across his face, carving frostbite into lips and nose, half blind, half frozen. Hold dead if I stall. He trimmed for straight and level, a prayer more than a plan, the jug's mass carrying her forward on momentum alone. France receded below, hedgerows blurring to coastal cliffs. The channel yawned ahead, a gray maw 80 miles wide. Flak batteries on Cap Grenets stirred, sensing stragglers. Black puffs blossomed distant, a warning. Johnson's hands, numb claws, wrestled the controls. No radio to call the lifeline, no wingman in sight, just man, machine, and the merciless sky. He spotted a contrail far north, friend or foe, but it faded. Time bled away in heartbeats. 10 minutes since the hit, blood pressure dropping like a stone. Stay awake. Sun's west, England that way. The jug wallowed, wings asymmetric from the damage, demanding constant correction. Vibration hummed through the seat, a dirge from the dying prop. He couldn't feel his feet anymore, toes curled and boots slick with gore. If the plane can still hold on, so can you. A mantra forged in Oklahoma winds, now his only anchor. The coastline sharpened, Calais cliffs, gun emplacements winking malice. Shells arced up, bracketing the lone P-47 in thunderclaps that rocked the airframe. Shrapnel pinged off the belly like hail on a roof. Johnson weaved by gut, the jug groaning in protest. One burst clipped the port wingtip, tearing a fresh gash. Fabric fluttered loose, a white flag in the slipstream. He pressed on, the channel's white caps rising to meet him. Salt spray almost tangible now, the promise of drowning if he ditched. Not without a fight. Engine temp climbed, smoke trailing from cowl gills, coolant gone, radials overheating in the unpressurized hell. He leaned into the wind, eyes slitted against the blast, blood crusting his lashes. 30 minutes in, unconsciousness tugged like a siren's hand. Vision grayed at the edges, thigh a furnace of pain. Just fly, that's all. The antagonist wasn't Buchholz anymore, the FW long gone, its precision and memory etched in holes. No, the true foe was this, the 200 rounds legacy. Shredded cockpit letting in the freeze, oxygen blasting frozen daggers into wounds. Dying instruments mocking with dead needles, blood loss sapping will, drop by drop, creeping dark, inevitable as tide. The jug fought too, her frame twisted but unbowed, radial coughing defiance. Together they clawed westward, a defiance stitched in steel and sinew. He wasn't flying anymore, he was clinging to life at 400 miles an hour. The channel stretched out like a vast indifferent grave. 80 miles of churning slate-gray fury, whitecaps clawing at the sky as if to drag down anything foolish enough to cross. Robert Johnson nursed Section 8 toward it, the Thunderbolt's wounded bulk slicing through the air at a limping 220 miles per hour. The engine's radial throbbed unevenly now, a consumptive cough that spat black smoke from the cowling gills, trailing a banner of oil and unburnt avgas visible for miles. At 5,000 feet, the world below blurred. French cliffs receding like a bad dream, the coastal batteries at Cap Gris-Nez belching their farewell in geysers of flak. Black bursts popped around him, close enough that shrapnel rattled against the jug's underbelly like buckshot on a tin roof. One shell detonated 50 yards off the port wing, the overpressure slamming the airframe sideways. Johnson wrestled the stick with arms leaden from blood loss, rudder pedals slick with his own seepage. Steady. West by the sun. No compass, its face a cratered ruin, but the lowering orb off his left shoulder served as gyro, a dusty Oklahoma sun marking the path home. Time fractured in the cockpit's chaos. 40 minutes since the FW's kiss of death, and Johnson's body betrayed him inch by inch. The thigh wound wept steadily, a slow pump that turned his flight boot into a sodden weight, crimson pooling and sloshing with each vibration. Morphine syringe lay untouched on the floor. Not yet. Can't dull the edge. Pain was lucidity now, a tether against the gray fog creeping at vision's periphery. His left eye was a swollen slit, crusted shut with frozen blood. The right strained against wind-whipped tears, the blast's chill turning them to ice needles that stung like betrayal. The canopy's absence was a cruel gesture. 200 miles per hour gales scouring his face raw, peeling skin from cheeks and lips in stinging strips. Frostbite set in fast, nose numb as wood, fingers clubbed inside gloves, refusing commands with a distant ache. Can't feel the trim wheel, just push. He leaned into the slipstream, shoulders hunched against the blade, tasting salt and iron on every ragged breath. The jug was his co-conspirator in this defiance, a battered colossus that absorbed the punishment meant to end them both. Her frame, twisted like a wrung rag from the 20mm Fury, held true. Bulkheads buckled but unbreached, the armored bathtub cockpit a defiant shell. Self-sealing tanks had plugged their leaks with coagulated rubber, starving the fires that should have bloomed. But she bled too. Coolant gone, the radial running hot, cylinder heads glowing cherry red under the cowl. Johnson feathered the prop instinctively, reducing RPM to 2,000, easing the strain, a pilot's mercy to his mount. Vibration hummed through the seat pan, a bone-deep buzz that set his teeth on edge, loose rivets rattling like maracas in hell. Instruments were tombstones, airspeed a fluttering ghost between 180 and stall, fuel gauge pegged empty, though a hidden reserve ticked away, unguessable. No flaps, no gear extension, hydraulics a memory, lines severed and drooling. He flew by seat of pants and sky, horizon tilt for bank, engine note for speed, the sun's arc for heading. Bend, don't break. The mantra looped, a Dust Bowl rosary. Flak pursued him across the coast, the German gunner's eyes sharp for stragglers. Batteries at Dunkirk stirred next, 88mm TWK shells arcing up in lazy parabolas that bracketed the lone P-47. A near miss at 4,000 feet. Crump sent concussion waves that slewed the Jug into a skid, wings asymmetric from the earlier wingtip chew. Johnson kicked opposite rudder, felt the pedal squelch and gore, and hauled back. Muscles screaming, back a knot of fire. Shrapnel peppered the trailing edge, tearing fresh vents in the elevator. The tail yawed lazily now, demanding constant stick pressure to hold straight and level. There, walking the bursts onto me. Time to jink. He weaved shallow S-turns, the motion taxing the dying engine, smoke thickening to a pall that fouled the prop wash. Below, the cliffs gave way to surf, waves 200 feet tall in the building chop, foam hissing white against basalt. Ditch here, and the channel would swallow him whole. Cold shock in seconds, hypothermia in minutes. No dinghy intact. The blast had shredded it to confetti. Fly or die wet. The crossing began in earnest at 150 hours, the French shore a smudge astern. Wind shifted off the bow, a headwind that clawed speed from the Jug's bones, stretching the 80 miles to an eternity. Johnson descended to 2,000 feet for thicker air, lungs grateful for the oxygen reprieve. But the trade-off was exposure. Coastal patrols now had a clearer shot. A FW-190 pair, latecomers from JG2, streaked low from Ostende, spotting the smoke trail like hounds on a scent. Johnson's heart lurched, no guns left. His Brownings lay, belts fed into oblivion during the evade. "Come on, boys," he muttered to the empty cockpit, voice raw as sandpaper. "I've got nothing for you." The Germans closed to 500 yards, wings flashing in the sun, precise like Buchholz's ghost. Tracers stitched the water short, walking up toward the Jug's belly. Johnson dove to the deck, salt spray misting the windscreen, the P-47's nose kissing wave tops at 50 feet. The F overshot in the clutter, pulling up in frustration. One peeled off east, low fuel hissing retreat. The other loitered, testing with opportunistic bursts. A 20mm grazed the canopy sill, ricocheting inside to thunk against the headrest. Too close. Johnson hauled up, trading altitude for separation, the chase fading as the German banked away. Lucky? No. Just meaner today. Blood loss mounted, a stealthy thief. Pulse thready in his temples, vision spotting black at the edges, hypovolemic shock whispering surrender. The thigh was a furnace now, infection's first kiss in the wind's chill, but he bound it rough with a torn map scrap, cinching tight till fresh pain sparked clarity. 40 minutes? Feels like hours. Dehydration joined the fray, lips cracked, tongue a leather scrap, worsened by the evaporating sweat in the gale. He sipped from the canteen once, water metallic with blood, then rationed the rest. Cold was the cruelest foe, -10 degrees effective with wind chill, the open cockpit a freezer. Frost rimed his mustache, ice crystals needling wounds, hands so numb he gripped the stick by momentum alone, fingers fused in spasm. Can't let go. Plane'll tumble. The Jug mirrored his decay, engine misfiring on every third revolution, prop feathering unevenly, a metronome of doom. Oil smoked bitter, fouling the air with acrid tang. Johnson cracked the cowl flaps wider, what remained, courting seizure for the slim relief. Navigation devolved to primal art. Sun at 30 degrees left, sinking toward the horizon. England's cliffs due west by dead reckoning. No landmarks over water, just endless gray flecked with freighter wakes and the distant mushroom of a U-boat hunt. Instinct guided, the channel's prevailing westerlies, the faint haze of Ramsgate's lighthouse if he dreamed. But reality was attrition. Every gust a shove toward France, every stall warning a siren's call to ditch. At midpoint, 40 miles out, delirium tugged. Hallucinations of dust storms, father's gravel voice, shovel harder boy, mingling with the prop's stutter. Not real. Sky's real. Home's real. He slapped his face, the sting a jolt, blood flaking like rust. The 56th's voices echoed phantom. Zemke's growl, Adam's plea. Where were they? Scattered over Villacoublay or nursing their own hurts? Johnson was alone, a speck in the void, man and machine lashed in mutual refusal. 60 miles in, the antagonists converged, a squall line brewing off Dover, thunderheads towering like anvils, lightning flickering blue in their bellies. Johnson skirted south, but crosswinds bucked the Jug like a rowboat in rapids, slewing him off course. Rain lashed sudden and horizontal, drumming the wings, turning the cockpit to a sluice. Visibility cratered to 200 yards, wave crests looming like breakers threatening to swamp the low-flying beast. Engine ingested water, coughing wetly. He climbed to 1,000 feet, trading oxygen for sight. Flak from English batteries mistook him at first. Allied gunners twitchy on intruder alerts, shells bursting wide but insistent. "Friendly! Damn it, friendly!" He roared at the dead radio, keying the mic in futile habit. A burst clipped the antenna stub, sparking final silence. 70 miles, body on the brink, blood pressure a whisper, limbs waterlogged weights. Thigh tourniquet bit deep, nerves screaming, cold numbed the pain to a dull roar. Vision tunneled, colors leaching to monochrome, the sea below a leaden smear, sky a bruised vault. Just one more turn. The jug wheezed, radial down to 5 cylinders, the 6th seized in protest. Vibration peaked, a earthquake in the soul, loose panels flapped like dying birds. Yet she held, Thunderbolt philosophy incarnate, over-engineered for the unbreakable. Johnson's grit matched it, Oklahoma steel in his veins. If she flies, I fly. The squall broke, rain easing to mist, and there, ghostly through the haze, white cliffs. Dover's ramparts, the gleam of Thanet. England, home. But ahead was England, between them everything trying to kill him. The coast of Kent rose out of the haze like a promise kept. White cliffs, green fields, the faint ribbon of the Thames estuary. Robert Johnson saw it all through one blood-crusted eye and a narrowing tunnel of vision. The engine was down to a dying heartbeat now, cylinders seizing one by one, the big double wasp coughing black smoke and oily gouts. Oil pressure 0. Coolant temperature pegged past red. The prop windmilled unevenly, a wounded bird trying to keep flapping. Manston airfield lay dead ahead, an emergency strip carved out of the marshes near Ramsgate, its runway long enough for crippled bombers and desperate fighters alike. He had no radio, no way to call the tower, no way to warn them he was coming in hot, blind, and half dead. The gear warning horn was long silent, hydraulics gone, so he reached down with a hand that no longer felt like his own and yanked the emergency gear lever. Nothing. He pumped it again, twice, 3 times, until something inside the belly groaned and the mains clunked down, locking with a reluctant clack. The nose gear stayed folded. A final insult. Fine. Belly it if I have to. No flaps, no brakes, no drag chute, just speed, prayer, and whatever steel Republic had poured into the jug's spine. The runway threshold rushed up at 180 miles per hour, far too fast. Johnson hauled the throttle to idle. The engine answered with a wet terminal cough and quit altogether. Propeller freezing mid-rotation like a snapped blade. Silence, sudden and violent, swallowed the cockpit. Only the wind remained, shrieking through the shredded fuselage, tearing at his face one last time. He crossed the fence low enough to clip the approach lights. The runway was a gray blur beneath him. He held the nose up as long as physics allowed, then let it drop. The belly kissed concrete with a scream of tortured aluminum. Sparks exploded outward in a white-hot fountain. The jug slid, skidded, slewed sideways, metal shrieking like a living thing. The locked mains dug in, tires smoking, rubber shredding in strips. The airframe fish-tailed, port wingtip carving a furrow in the grass verge before the momentum finally bled itself out. Section 8 rolled to a stop 200 yards past the tower, smoke curling from every seam, the engine cowling glowing dull red in the dusk. Silence again. Real silence this time. Johnson sat motionless, hands still fused to the stick, staring at the cracked windscreen. The world tilted, grayed, then went black. He came to with the copper taste of blood and the smell of aviation fuel thick in his nose. Hands were pulling at him, British ground crew in blue coveralls, faces pale under the floodlights. "Easy, mate. Easy. We've got you." A stretcher. Morphine, finally. The cold receded like a tide. Someone pressed a flask of brandy to his cracked lips. He swallowed once, coughed, and managed a cracked whisper. "The jug, how bad?" A Royal Air Force flight sergeant laughed, half in disbelief. "Bloody hell, sir. She looks like she flew through a meat grinder and kept flying out of spite." They carried him past the wreckage under arc lights. Major David Thomas, the American liaison engineer attached to Manston, stood frozen beside the Thunderbolt, clipboard forgotten in his hand. He would count later, meticulously, every scar. 21 confirmed 20mm cannon hits, more than 100 7.92mm and 13mm machine gun strikes, the canopy blown away, the tail half shot off, the cockpit a butcher's shop of shattered glass and blood-soaked armor plate. 120mm had detonated directly beneath the seat and been stopped only by the thick steel slab Republic had bolted there for exactly this nightmare. The self-sealing tanks had sealed. The armored ring around the engine had held. The radial, though cooked, had never seized completely. Thomas shook his head, voice low. This airplane should not be in one piece. This pilot should not be alive. Johnson spent 3 weeks in hospital, thigh stitched, face rebuilt, frostbite turning to blisters and scars. Colonel Zemke visited on the 4th day, boots still muddy from Halesworth, eyes unreadable behind pipe smoke. He dropped a small package on the bed, a new scarf, silk, painted with the Wolfpack insignia. "You scared the hell out of us, Bob," he said simply. "Good to have you back." No speeches, just the nod of one predator recognizing another who had stared death down and walked away. He returned to combat in August, climbing into a replacement jug as if nothing had happened. The holes in his memory filled with new victories. 5 more kills by October, then 10, then 15. By war's end, Robert S. Johnson stood at 27 confirmed, one of America's highest-scoring aces, all of them earned in the cockpit of the airplane that refused to die with him. The legacy rippled outward. Engineers pored over the photographs of Section 8, the most savagely damaged flyable fighter anyone had ever seen. Lessons were written in every torn bulkhead. More armor behind the pilot, thicker glass, redundant systems, self-sealing lines. When Fairchild Republic designed the A-10 Thunderbolt II 3 decades later, they looked back to June 26, 1943, and built a flying tank around the same philosophy. Protect the pilot at all costs. Give him a machine that will not quit until he does. Pilots still repeat the line Johnson scrawled in the margin of his combat report, the one the ground crews painted on the nose of every new jug. In the 56th, if the plane can still hold on, so can you. Some legends are written in glory. This one was written in bullet holes. Subscribe for more untold World War II brilliance.